So I'll sort of do an introduction to the work that we've been doing over here at Cabrini. This goes back to about 2 years ago when we were at was our first attendance at the CAS Symposium. The theme was UDL for Social Justice. And we came back and we realized that for us, it generated a conversation around two issues. One is the increasing diversity that we have at our own institution, Cabrini University. And the second, obviously, those are us, the presenters today. And the second was, how could we address the diversity at our own institution and at the same time prepare, we have a large teacher preparation program here at Cabrini, and how could we also prepare our future teachers that they could go into the classroom and implement these practices? Okay. The second part of our goal was we were always hopeful that we would be able to find a K-12 partner to work with us in this work. And we'll talk a little bit about the fact that a year ago, that partnership did emerge for us. Okay, and these are just some of the statistics that we know are applicable here at Cabrini University. We increasingly have more Black and Hispanic students attending the institution, and we also have always served a lot of first-generation college students. And again, here are some of our statistics. We also do have a large percentage of the population here at Cabrini. They do identify as having a disability. So we have a very diverse institution. And then we recognize the fact that EDUCAUSE was identifying 2018 and 2019 that key issues in teaching and learning. As you recall, there was a big jump in UDL from number 12 to number 2 in 2008, and then last year, number 5 in 2019. And so just a little background for us at the institution. We also have a number of centers within our School of Education. Dr. Whitaker is a director of our Center for Urban Education, Equity and Improvement. Dr. Gentile is an assistant director of our Center for Children of Trauma and Domestic Violence. And I'm really happy and excited to tell you that we now have a Center for Universal Design for Learning on campus as well. And over here you see that our challenge that we addressed after we came back from the CAS Symposium, UDL for Social Justice, was how can we as a School of Education address the challenges of academic diversity in our own classrooms in order to best prepare future teacher educators and leaders. And then our goal became, how do we look at our teacher preparation coursework? And increasingly, you know, we have a fair number of face-to-face classes, but we also have more hybrid classes and more online classrooms. And then how can we weave together that UDL for learning, UDL, growth mindset and culture responsive pedagogy and the pursuit of expert learning. And I think back to the presentation again 2 years ago that talked about cross-pollinating universal design for learning with culturally responsive practices. Okay, and I'm going to turn the screen over to Dr. Gentile.
Okay, so can everybody hear me? Okay. So we came up with this terminology of dynamic trio, right? So universal design for learning obviously gives us a great framework for good instruction, right? And coming at it where we remember all learners, not just those that you don't want to teach to the middle, right? We want to remember everyone and the margins, right? So this idea of the mindset is you have to have a certain mindset as you go into this as well. So you have to believe in your learners. You have to believe in your capacity as an educator to reach and teach all learners. And that all starts with relationship. Right, being able to really relate and to get to know each and every one of your students, and in terms of who they are, where they come from, and where they want to go. Okay, so the idea then is to use these 3 approaches, using universal design as the umbrella, using this mindset as your guide, and then also make sure that you're using practices that are explicitly and intentionally culturally responsive as well. So you use these instructional practices then to build those relationships, ultimately to increase student achievement. And you really want to make sure that each of your learners are valued, empowered as holistically, emotionally, socially, and intellectually.
Right. And one of the things that I would say about Cabrini is, if you talk to our students, I think that many of them will tell you that one of the things that attracts them to our university is that they do feel a strong connection with most of the faculty and the staff here on campus. And I think we really work very hard to foster those connections with our students. Okay.
Okay. So when I'm talking about the mindset, it's based off of the work of Carol Dweck, where she uses the terminology of a fixed mindset and how that can be a real block to learning. So we have to make sure that we explicitly teach the students about how you can grow your brain, how you can use neuroscience to create new pathways in your mind, but you have to be aware that what you tell yourself and what you believe is going to impact that. So somebody with a fixed mindset then has this idea that failure is bad. If you come across a challenge, then therefore you aren't able to do it, and that's a problem. And they tend to shut down, right? And so they feel like effort shouldn't be needed. If there's effort needed, then I obviously just don't have that ability, and that's just not the case. You know, we can create abilities, right? So that's where the fixed mindset is. And what you really want to promote is this idea of a growth mindset, and really teach our students explicitly that mistakes are part of learning. And, you know, when you're making a mistake, that's okay. And actually it's a good thing, because you're one step closer to identifying and learning what works for you in terms of this growth. Effort is necessary. Struggle is a part of the process. And so you need to embrace struggle and have this mindset that, okay, I'm struggling. This means I'm about to create a new pathway. I'm about to strengthen myself, and I'm about to learn something new. So you confront deficiencies with this approach of, okay, I'm gonna grow from this, and I'm gonna increase my skill set. And as educators, we need to do that, but we also need to make sure our learners understand that. Okay, but at the same time, and Carol Dweck even comes out and says, don't oversimplify this. You know, it's not just, you can't just boil it down to praising the effort, not the outcome, which, I mean, that is important that we make them see the skills that they're using, the strategies that they're using in the learning, not just the final outcome, right? But you need to also make sure that they know that it's not just trying, but it's the right trying. It can be really damaging to tell somebody, well, if you know, with effort, you can do this. Well, it's not just, it has to be the right effort, the right strategies that work for that particular child. So it's really important that they make that connection. And they need to know that it's okay if it takes a while, and if it's an arduous process, right? That is part of learning, and it's okay to do that. So it's the whole idea of really, praising the process, but also making sure they understand that, yes, it's effort, but it's the particular effort that's going to work for you. And these are the strategies that are going to work. And if one doesn't, then you try another one. And students need to be comfortable with that in order to become these expert learners that we're trying to develop. However, don't simplify it to labeling, modeling, or writing off, or stereotyping, or writing off students. You don't want to label them. You don't want to put them into a category, right? So it's really, it's supposed to be a promotion and an encouragement of students, not any kind of limitation. All right, so you want to use it to empower your learners, make sure that they understand that they have they have skin in the game, if you will, that what they tell themselves and what they practice is really going to determine what happens in their brain. So they need to truly believe in their ability, and you as an educator need to believe in their ability, and you also have to believe in your own ability to pursue through challenges, and that you're able to keep at it with the students to help them identify what works for them. There's multiple pathways, and you just want to keep creating them and figuring out what works for any individual. But it's really about inspiring your learner. And then, it's also shown that if you teach students specifically about this process, teaching them about how the brain works and how our brain can change and how it can grow and you can create new neural pathways, that intentional teaching them of that actually helps to open up these opportunities to new ways of learning.
And one of the things that I'd like to just jump in for a second is at the CAST Symposium this year, we sat through a number of sessions where people talked about how the culturally responsive pedagogies and the mindset are really embedded in the principles.
Yes. Okay, so these are just some of the strategies that we think would be explicit as part of this, universal design framework, right? Teach them about the growth mindset, about brain plasticity. Make sure that you're growth oriented in your relationship with the students, that you believe in them and you teach them how to believe in themselves. Now, the important thing, especially in higher education, is you really don't want people to think that you're lowering your expectations. It's not about lowering expectations. In fact, it's about really promoting high expectations and identifying different paths of getting there. Right. So again, use that process-oriented feedback, identify learning goals, teach the value of mistakes, all right, and then use the framework and all the different multiple pathways in that framework to reach and teach all learners.
And one of the things we have embedded at the end of the presentation that we don't have time for today is we have some examples of how we're actually doing that in the classroom, particularly as it relates to our learning management system. So working very hard at thinking about the kind of feedback we give students that really does encourage them and help them to understand that they are capable of doing the work.
It's that idea of the power of yet, right? So, they need to understand that learning is a process. It's not an outcome, it's a journey. And so the power of, I love to say, if they say, oh, I don't understand this, I don't know. Well, no, not yet. Okay, but we're on that path, we're gonna get there. So they just need to be able to accept, the feedback, constructive, ideas of what they can do to get what they're trying to achieve. And flexible groupings is a great approach. And also I like to encourage the use of choice. So if you're real clear about the outcomes that you're trying to reach, what your objectives are, allow the students some freedom in how they're going to express that, how they're going to express their understanding, how they're going to show you that they've met that objective. It's amazing what students will come to you with when you give them the freedom of expression. And so this all works so well within that framework.
And while we're modeling these for the students in our classroom, we're also talking with them explicitly about what we are modeling and why we are modeling, the purpose. Okay.
Okay, so as mentioned, my work, part of my work here at Cabrini University, I also direct our Center for Urban Education, Equity and Improvement. And one of our most sought after professional developments has to do with culturally responsive practices. Students are, teachers and educational leaders are really grappling with how can they get their faculty and staff to utilize cultural practices that will engage all students. So for time's sake, we can't go over everything, but at the same time,
materials are there.
One of the biggest pieces, Mary, if you could just go back to the previous slide real quick. Yes, I think it's just very important that we understand that when we employ culturally responsive practices, it's not lowering down the curriculum or quote unquote dumbing it down, but basically we're using that as a tool to use students' cultural learning style, some of the norms and their traditions, and embedding that into the work that we do in the classroom. If you go to the next slide, one of the things that's important, so for example, Christopher Emden, he's doing great work at Columbia University where he's teaching students STEM, but he's utilizing hip hop lyrics as the bridge to teach students STEM. So as we talk about memory strategies like connecting what needs to be remembered to rhyme or music, that's something that has been shown through research to work. So as we go on, some of the other pieces that you could utilize is obviously games. And Mary, you do a lot of this work. You've been doing this here for years at Cabrini, so perhaps you could speak a little bit to this piece.
Well, yeah, I try to employ games in the classroom all the time. Sometimes there are ways to, just the other day, we were using a game-like format to prepare for an upcoming test. But also sometimes to introduce new information or to connect information to background information. So there's lots of ways that I can use technology, particularly in game-like formats. And I do find the students are very responsive, and actually they will ask for it. The other day, I was using paired deck in the classroom, and they wanted me, they had remembered that a couple of weeks ago, I had embedded a game into that slide, and they wanted to know, you know, why wasn't I bringing that game back again? So you sort of know something's really working and working well when they request it, and help you to understand that it really did help them to make that connection, and it was keeping them engaged and persistent with the task that we were doing in class.
So the importance of making our community social is is critically important. So for example, I always challenge teachers and educational leaders not to write off students. So some of the students that we may label as being disengaged in the classroom, I challenge them on a weekend. You go to a faith institution, and that same student that we are labeling as disengaged, within their faith institution, they're leading a praise dance, they're one of the leading actors or actresses within the play, or they're doing a speech, and they're very engaged. So what is it about that faith institution's norms that is a counter narrative to how we're operating in the classroom? And what I argue is that it's about community, right? And community and relationships is very important. As we continue, it's also important that stories, it's something that has to be utilized in the classroom. Me putting on my critical race theory lens, one of the tenets of critical race theory is that it's important that we offer counter narratives to these dominant narratives that have been passed down. So, you know, you need to think about, okay, how, even if it's math, how do I make stories a part of the lesson? Mary?
Yeah, so I'm going to just interject here again, too. I'm going to go back to the game for a second. I was speaking so quickly. I really didn't give you a good example. So I use a lot of QR code kinds of games in the class, but recently I've begun doing Flipgrid hunts. And they've been enjoying that because this idea of a different kind of representation under UDL so that they can use video recording now. They've been enjoying. And coming to the Store Fayette, last summer at the symposium, Allison did a great presentation about the power of narrative in universal design. And I know I've been bringing more narrative into my own teaching, encouraging the students to share their stories, their personal stories, their educational stories. And because I'm also the parent of a child with a disability and I teach a class on inclusion, and actually it was my own daughter that brought me to Universal Design for Learning X number of years ago, I find that I'm using more of our family story, her family story, to help them make the connections to some of the things that we're talking about in class.
Okay, great. So I know for time's sake, I want to probably touch on a couple points from the remaining slides. But the biggest thing is, if we look at point number one, it's about relationships and respect, right? And, you know, culturally responsive teaching, culturally responsive practices is basically saying that we not only do we respect, but we value the students, we value the communities, and we're committed to relationships.
And one of the things I'll just step in there and say, when I looked at my own class, just a simple thing a simple change that I could make, I recognized that a lot of the videos, a lot of the pictures that I use, I really needed to represent teachers of color in more of my videos and in more of the pictures that I choose to use in class. Okay. You want to talk about Hammond's work there?
For time's sake, if we could get to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay. So, you know, we say beware of the barriers, and, you know, me putting now my professor hat on within our teacher prep program, we're saying that the hidden curriculum, that is the curriculum that we need to pay the most attention to, because at the end of the day, once you get into practice, whether we're talking about issues of trauma, issues of poverty, students not feeling connected to the school community, that's going to be the make or break, right? So we have to check ourselves, our own implicit biases, our own deficit thinking that we may have against certain students in certain communities. Stereotype threat is very important. So if you're not familiar with stereotype threat, Claude Steele has been doing great work on this for over 25 years. I challenge you to get the book Whistling Vivaldi, but the bottom line is what he's arguing is that identity within a certain context is very important, right? And he talks about these contingencies.
You repeat the name of the book?
Yes, the book is called Whistling Vivaldi. We had one of our colleagues wanted to know the name, Whistling Vivaldi by Dr. Claude Steele. And then microaggressions. And microaggressions, we know, are those everyday insults and slights that we may give off to our students, to parents, to community members. And in many ways, we may think, well, you know what? I didn't mean to offend them, right? But again, that goes back to point number 2, or bullet number 2, where we have to check our own stuff, our own residue, and how other students are perceiving it. Yes. Thanks, Jennifer. We appreciate you for sharing the resource. In summary, one of the things that I always challenge teachers and educational leaders, culturally responsive practices is just not for those students and that community. Cultural practices is very important for everyone, right? So what we're arguing is that culturally responsive teaching doesn't have to be some performance that the teacher does to entertain students. It's not about entertainment, but what it is about is exemplar teaching practices that connects students' cultural traditions to the curriculum. So for time's sake, I guess, let me just stop.
Ron, the only other thing I wanted to say here is some of the work that we're doing, that we're helping our students to understand that there is disability culture as well.
Yes.
And we've been having a lot of conversations around that with our students. Okay, and this is just a crosswalk that we had put together. You can see it takes the work of the culturally responsive pedagogy work, and it takes the mindset work, and then the CAST principles, and we just sort of crosswalk them together for our faculty and our students to see how they do work together. I know that a number of graduate students are using culturally responsive design for English language learners, and then Amber does a lot of the mindset work, and I've been working a lot with the UDL framework with our faculty. So this is just really internally something that we use so they make those connections and see how they work in collaboration with each other. And again, just looking at representation, and then action and expression. Okay. And so that sort of brings us to part 2. We were really excited because last year, just around this time, the reason I have Starbucks coffee cups up is the rest of the faculty were up at a conference, and I was back here in Pennsylvania, and I happened to stop to grab my daughter a Christmas coffee cup at Starbucks, which I never go to Starbucks. And we had one of our alums was in Starbucks. He called over to me, and he knew that I had an interest in universal design for learning. And I'm going to backtrack a little bit and tell you that 2 years ago, one of the things that we noticed when we were at the symposium was sort of, where is Pennsylvania in all of this? Even our ESSA plan doesn't specifically talk about universal design for learning. So Jesse and I got into a conversation, and he said, you know, over at the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit, we're really interested in looking at this as well. And we wondered, could we work in partnership with the MCIU, Cabrini University, and then some of the K-12 districts in Montgomery County to talk about and implement universal design for learning with culturally responsive pedagogies and mindset work, really considering the equity of our educational practices. Okay, and here we have some of the schools that we're currently working with. Martin Luther School is a private school that works with students with behavior challenges. And then we have, I think, Ron and Amber, we have about 5 districts that have stepped up, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we sort of got together last year and we drafted what we call a co-learning plan. And we thought of that in terms of a 3 to 5 year learning cohort with a year of learning and exploration. And as a matter of fact, we kicked off that year with CAST was down in Montgomery County, Heather and Kasha, and they took us through, I forget, it was 2 or 3 days of training with the districts, with the MCIU, and with a team from Cabrini University. So this is our year where we are just learning and exploring, but we're getting a really nice response from the districts. We see year 2 as a commitment to implementation on a larger scale. Year 3 would be our sustainability and creating a community of practitioners. And then year 4, some optional consultation and coach training. And then we haven't really fully divided year 5, but we see that as a much deeper dive into UDL. Okay, and this was just our Summer Institute kickoff, which was facilitated by the wonderful folks at CAST, and I really will say that we had a very enjoyable time together, learning together and exploring UDL together. And Ron, do you want to talk about some of the equity work you've been doing with them as well?
Yeah, so in short, I've been utilizing a framework that I'm calling HELP. And when we're talking about issues of equity, what I argue is that HELP stands for the H, we have to deal with our history that we know, unfortunately, has been dealing with racism, sexism, ageism, ableism, and phobias. The E is really challenging teachers and educational leaders to understand the difference between equality and equity, because one of the things I argue is that oftentimes we hear leaders talk about they're committed to equity, and at best, perhaps they're doing equality practices. The L deals with love and the need for us to value our students and how important it is for our students to have a sense of belonging. And the P, we're just going a little bit deeper into the pedagogy, the practices, and the programming.
And then that's just a sample that if you want to use that QR code, you can just see what we've mapped out for the first year together with our partners at the Montgomery County Intermediate Unit. Okay. And then finally, we have a couple Padlets up here, and then the last slide. So this is a Padlet that we use in-house here at Cabrini, where I sort of gather a lot of resources for investigating and implementing UDL and mindset and culturally responsive teaching. And that's public, so you're free to look at the resources that we've accumulated. This is one that we're developing currently for our MCIU and district partnerships. And so you can see we've got right there looking at bias and microaggressions, because when Ron presented a couple of weeks ago to the K-12 districts, I thought what he did so masterfully was to help them to understand the tie-in with universal design for learning as an equity practice. And then finally, this will just take you, we don't have time to look at all the examples, but this will take you to another PowerPoint slide where when we presented at CAST, we had a lot of screenshots of work that we're doing, particularly in our learning management system. And it'll just show you how we've taken the principles and how we've tried to enact those principles with a focus on mindset and culturally responsive teaching in our classrooms. And here at Cabrini, even though a class may be face-to-face, we tend to really harness the power of our learning management system to sort of wrap supports around our students during all of that out of class time. So, and that's one of the things that I really enjoy most working with our faculty, is helping them come up with some innovative ways that we can look at those principles and think about how could we, what would that look like in Learn? What does it look like in the classroom? What could that look like in Learn? Okay. Okay. And we always appreciate hearing from people and staying in touch with everyone. And we'd love to hear your questions and your comments.
Definitely. Yes. Anybody have any thoughts or comments or questions?
I'm going to tell them to unmute. Any questions or comments or feedback? I know that many of you are doing this work. We would love to hear your feedback. When we presented at CAST, we got so much wonderful feedback from people in the audience.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate about the, you know, making sure that you watch your mindset and your expectations, because in the chat, it seems like people are saying like, yeah, we have to, you know, watch, you know, what we're thinking about, you know, judging a student when they're disengaged. Like, what does disengaged mean, and what does that look like, right? So always make sure that you're watching your expectations in terms of and maintaining those high expectations for the students, and that belief that they can get there and will get there and deserve to get there.
Okay. Can't see anybody else. Okay.
All right. Well, thank you for logging in.
Thank you so much, colleagues.
Yes. Thank you.